Before we get into this absolute horror show, subscribe to Silent Archive for more dark history. Seriously, hit that button. And while you're at it, comment below what story we should dig up next. Now, let's talk about the man on the $20 bill. We've called him the devil before, but today we prove it. You think the Trail of Tears was just one sad walk? Honey, it was a decade of state-sponsored segments of hell. Buckle in, we're taught this in school like it's a tragic oopsie. A single path, like a dark version of the Oregon Trail. But it wasn't a game. It was 20 different tribes, 88,000 people. And concentration camps, yeah, I said it, where thousands died before they even started walking. Jackson engineered it with precision. It started with George Washington and the Indian problem. The colonizers wanted a blank slate. They saw these thriving nations as squatters on land that was meant for cotton. They wanted the land to print money, and they didn't care about the ancestors buried there. Enter Andrew Jackson. This man had a personal vendetta and a life hack. Kick the natives off, take the land, become a hero. He signed the Indian Removal Act of 1830. He told the public it was voluntary, which is the biggest lie in history. It's like a mandatory donation. If you don't volunteer, you get destroyed. He promised them Oklahoma was just for them. Spoiler alert, it was the land the government considered leftovers, but before the Cherokee, there were others. The Choctaw were first. In 1831, the Choctaw were forced out in the dead of winter. No food, no help. A record-breaking blizzard turned the path into a graveyard. A Choctaw leader called it a trail of tears and death. That's where the name comes from. They were the trial run for the cruelty to come. But not everyone went quietly. The Seminoles in Florida? Total badasses. They started a guerrilla war that cost Jackson $40 million. They fought for 13 years. Jackson was relentless. Back when he was a war hero, he was already known for cutting off noses of his enemies. The Cherokee took a different route. They fought in the Supreme Court. And in the landmark case Worcester versus Georgia, they actually won. Chief Justice John Marshall ruled that Georgia had no authority over Cherokee land. But Jackson? He literally ignored the law. Jackson famously said, "John Marshall has made his decision. Let him enforce it now if he can." It was a total breakdown of democracy. He found 500 random tribe members, not the leaders, and got them to sign a fake treaty, the Treaty of New Echota. It was a fraud. Principal Chief John Ross got 16,000 signatures to protest it, nearly the entire nation. But the Senate ratified it by just one single vote. Jackson left office, and in came Martin Van Buren. He sent 7,000 troops to drag 16,000 Cherokee out of their homes at bayonet point. Imagine sitting down for dinner and soldiers burst in. You aren't allowed to grab a coat. You're marched into holding camps. Disease ran rampant. 353 Cherokees died in those camps before the march even began. Dysentery, cholera, and starvation were their only companions. Then came the 1,200-mile walk, 13 detachments of 1,000 people each, mostly on foot, through one of the worst winters on record. They walked through mud, snow, and ice. Rations were moldy. Many had no shoes. 1 in 5 Cherokees died on that trail. They reached Indian Territory, modern-day Oklahoma, broken and grieving. But the story didn't end there. Revenge was swift. The men who signed that fake treaty, Major Ridge, his son, and Elias Boudinot, they were all assassinated by their own people for the betrayal. So why is Jackson still on the 20? We've tried to replace him with Harriet Tubman, but the ghost of his heroism still haunts our currency. The Trail of Tears wasn't just a walk. It was a decade of state-sponsored hell, and the man who engineered it is still in your wallet. But why now? Why the 1830s? The answer is white gold, cotton. Eli Whitney's cotton gin turned the South into a global powerhouse. Suddenly, land in Georgia and Alabama was worth millions. The Black Belt wasn't just about the soil, it was about the blood and labor of the enslaved. Removing the native nations cleared 25 million acres for white settlement. It wasn't just removal, it was a massive real estate heist. This boom revitalized the domestic slave trade. Over 1 million people were forcibly moved in what's called the Second Middle Passage. Removal and slavery were two sides of the same coin. Jackson's nickname among the tribes wasn't Old Hickory, it was Sharp Knife, a name earned through blood in the Creek War of 1813. At the Battle of Horseshoe Bend, Jackson's forces killed nearly 1,000 warriors. It was the highest death toll for Native Americans in a single battle, ever. Even the tribes that fought as his allies were betrayed. In the Treaty of Fort Jackson, he took 23 million acres from friends and foes alike, uncompromising, cold, sharp. Samuel Worcester was a white ally who fought back. A missionary who lived with the Cherokee, he helped establish the Cherokee Phoenix newspaper. Using Sequoia's syllabary, the Cherokee became literate in weeks. This wasn't just civilization, it was a declaration of intellectual independence. Worcester was arrested for refusing to swear allegiance to Georgia. His civil disobedience led to the Supreme Court. He chose the law, Jackson chose the sword. The Cherokee weren't the only ones. In Indiana, the Potawatomi were marched at gunpoint toward Kansas in 1838. The Trail of Death. They walked 660 miles in 2 months. Over 40 died, mostly children. To prevent them from returning, the government burned their homes as they left. Total erasure. In Florida, the Seminoles turned the Everglades into a fortress. This was the Second Seminole War, the longest and costliest in U.S. history. Osceola and his warriors used hit-and-run tactics to neutralize the U.S. military. They couldn't be beaten in the field, so Jackson's generals targeted the civilians, burned the crops, starved them out. The Black Seminoles, escaped enslaved people who joined the tribe, were the government's biggest fear. Florida was a sanctuary for freedom. The war wasn't just about land. It was about stopping the contagion of freedom. If Florida remained a refuge, the plantation system of the South was at risk. Jackson wouldn't allow it. In 1839, the survivors gathered in Tahlequah. Despite the trauma, they drafted a new constitution. They chose order over chaos, sovereignty over despair. Tahlequah became the capital of a refounded nation. It stands today as a monument to political endurance. They were removed, but they were never broken. The Trail of Tears isn't just a chapter in a textbook. It's a lived history of displacement that still shapes the borders of our continent. Today, the Cherokee Nation is one of the most successful sovereign governments in the world. Their survival is the ultimate defeat of Andrew Jackson's vision. Thanks for joining me in the archive today. History isn't just about the past. It's about the eyes with which we see the present. I'll see you in the next one. In 1837, the Seminole leader Osceola was captured in a move that shocked the world. He arrived under a white flag of truce to negotiate. He chose honor. His captors chose betrayal. General Thomas Jessup baited him into a trap. Osceola was surrounded and seized while carrying a peace pipe. He died months later in prison, defiant until his last breath. Medicine couldn't save him, and the government couldn't break him. Reverend Daniel Butrick traveled with the Richard Taylor Detachment. His journal is a map of suffering. He recorded women forced to continue marching while in active labor, mothers losing children to the cold of the Tennessee. Butrick wrote of volleys of oaths from white settlers who watched the starving refugees pass. He documented the burial of Little Mary and an elderly blind man named Avahi. These aren't just statistics, they are ghosts that haunt the roads of the South. The Muskogee removal in 1836 was a military operation against civilians. 15,000 people were forcibly moved. Many were chained together in pairs like criminals, chained on their own land. They were marched through the mud of Alabama and Mississippi. Thousands died from exhaustion and exposure before they even reached the Mississippi River. It was a harvest of misery, fueled by the greed for cotton. Upon arrival in the West, the blood law was invoked. An ancient statute, anyone who sold tribal land without consent forfeited their life. On June 22, 1839, the leaders of the Treaty Party were targeted in a coordinated strike. John Ridge was dragged from his bed. Major Ridge was ambushed on his horse. Elias Boudinot was hacked to death with tomahawks. 3 deaths in one morning. The removal didn't just kill people, it turned families against each other in a bloody civil war. In 2020, the Supreme Court ruling in McGirt v. Oklahoma changed everything. It affirmed that the reservations of the 5 tribes were never formally disestablished. On the far end of the trail was a promise, and that promise was finally kept. Today, the Cherokee Nation has a $3.1 billion annual economic impact. They have their own marshal service, their own Supreme Court, and their own healthcare system. They aren't just survivors. They are a powerhouse of sovereignty in the 21st century. The resurgence is built on language. The Cherokee Immersion Charter School is raising a new generation of fluent speakers. They are reclaiming the sounds and stories that Andrew Jackson tried to silence. It's an intellectual reconstruction. Language revitalization isn't just about the past, it's about the future. By 2025, the tribe allocated over $20 million to ensure the language thrives. It's the ultimate act of defiance, to speak the language of a land you were told to forget. They've built the largest tribal-owned healthcare system in the world. While the trail brought disease and death, the modern Cherokee Nation brings life and healing. They provide world-class medical care to over 466,000 citizens. Prosperity from the ashes. This healthcare system isn't just about clinics, it's about self-determination. They don't rely on federal handouts. They fund their own survival through a massive $3.6 billion budget. The 5 tribes are now the primary economic engines of Oklahoma. Politically, the nation is stronger than ever. Principal Chief Chuck Hoskin Jr. leads a tripartite government that mirrors the democracy Jackson claimed to uphold. They exercise judicial authority over millions of acres of ancestral reservation land. Sovereignty isn't a gift, it's a right. The McGirt ruling was a generational win. It affirmed that on the far end of the trail, the promise of land and self-rule was never formally broken by Congress. Eastern Oklahoma is Indian country, and it always will be. Jackson's vision was finite. Cherokee sovereignty is infinite. History is a living thing. The maps may have changed, but the connection to the land remains unbroken. The Trail of Tears was meant to be a period, a final stop, but the Native nations turned it into a comma, a pause before the next great chapter. We remember the horror not to stay in the dark, but to see the light of the survivors, the 60,000 who were removed, and the millions who now stand in their place. Their success is the most eloquent rebuke of tyranny ever written. It's a story of unbreakable human spirit. The Trail of Tears was intended to be an ending, a final chapter for the Native nations, but instead it became a story of resilience, a story that is still being written today by the 466,000 citizens of the Cherokee Nation. The archive is never closed. Remember the truth, no matter how dark, because the future belongs to those who carry the stories of the past. I'm your host for the Silent Archive, and I'll see you in the next one. Keep looking deeper.